Well, today we're thrilled to welcome Ambassador Charlene Barshefsky to our virtual stage. She served as USTR from 1997 to 2001, following 4 years as Deputy USTR. And this was quite an active time during US trade policy and global trade policy, as well as a contentious time as well. Prior to and after her 8 years at USTR, she served as a trade lawyer, and now she's running her own consulting firm, as well as serving on a number of boards. Charlene was probably best known for leading the U.S. negotiating team to China's WTO accession. China entered the WTO now 20 years. We're approaching the 20-year anniversary. But that's what she's known for. But yet she was so active working with Japan and Vietnam, Europe, the Middle East. And she also was very involved in WTO negotiations as well. So with that, let me turn to Ambassador Barshefsky and just start it off. You've been involved in a lot of different negotiations. Which one was the most memorable, and maybe which one was the most challenging, or are all negotiations challenging in one regard or another?
Well, first of all, it's wonderful to be with you. Your audience may not know, but you and I worked together for a number of years, which was one of the best parts of being at USTR. Every negotiation is different. Every negotiation has its challenges and its ups and downs, and the cadence of every negotiation is different. It depends on the issues presented. It depends on how contentious those issues are, how politically difficult they might be, or how easy they might be to do. And it's just a matter of administrative discretion. And personalities involved. There's some folks you get along with, and there's some folks you just don't get along with, however respectful and nice you think you're being. And it depends, of course, on the pressures each side is under from their own administrations, and whether in the context of those pressures, there are different views as to what should be accomplished. Assiduous, one should, in the U.S. view, another part, other view. And it depends also on the skills of the negotiator. I think there's some people who are natural negotiators, just have an intuitive sense of where the other side is, where the negotiation's going to go, how its proposals will be received. It has an intuitive sense of the personality, the concerns of the other side without that being spoken. And there's some negotiators that are highly ethical, not very intuitive. So there are different kinds of people who do this kind of work. Some are more successful than others, but largely depending on the nature of the negotiation and the people involved. When you're a USTR, when you're a trade minister or a finance or foreign minister, you of course deal with the world. You don't just deal with China or just with France or just with Brazil or just with South Africa or just with Jordan. You're dealing with the world. And oftentimes those regional politics and policies also impact the nature of the negotiation that you're having, especially if the country you're negotiating with is viewed as a regional stalwart, as a regional opinion leader. That country may feel under pressures, not because of its own domestic concerns, but because of regional concerns and the perception of their regional leadership. So it's a complicated area. It's great fun, but every negotiation is its own puzzle. And you just have to think through all of the combinations and permutations and all of the other factors I've just mentioned in order to achieve success.
negotiations have a lot of ups and downs. And I know we work together and a lot of ups, but a lot of downs. How do you deal with the downs? Like, did you have times where you just wanted to give up? You just wanted to leave that country and go back to Washington and say, they're not ready. We can't go further. What was your thinking? Can you give us any examples?
So sure. There are many times you think, this is it. I'm done. We've been through every argument. I'm out of here. And that happened from time to time with the Chinese, certainly with the Japanese, with the Brazilians, South Africans, with any one of a number of countries where you're at something more than a stalemate. It isn't just that the issue isn't progressing as you would like, because in that case, you move on to some other issue. You leave aside what you're having trouble with, and you move on to something else. You rebuild momentum. You go back to the issue you were having trouble with. See if that timing is better for that issue. If it isn't, you move on to some other issue, but then you always go back. You never just leave anything. It isn't that situation. It's a situation where nothing is happening, where all the other side wants is for the U.S. to leave them alone. And all the U.S. wants is for the other side to do something, anything, to show good faith. And when none of that is happening, that's when you throw up your hands and you say, okay, I'm out of here. The way you say I'm out of here, though, is never, I'm out of here, I never want to see you again, right? You're not breaking up. You're just taking a pause. And so in the case of negotiations, I can think of the Japanese example particularly. They're very tough negotiators, very particular, very specific, and very difficult to move. In that case, you might say, look, we're not getting anywhere now. It makes no sense to continue the current conversation. Why don't we reconvene in a month? Or why don't we chat on the phone in a couple of weeks? Let's just take temperature, see where we are. So you never just cut things off. You always leave room to go back to the table. But certainly there are different points in a negotiation where if you continue on the track you're on, you're only going downhill, meaning you're only getting further and further away from your goal. You never want to do that. So you want to stop things, reset, take a little time, then go back to it and see if you can make progress. The other thing that you have to do often is reframe the issue, reframe the request. You don't ask for the same thing in the same way every single time, because no the first time is no the 20th time. Can you think of the issue in a different way? Can you package that issue with another issue that is of consistent type that the other side might find? Can you change the nature of the argument you're making? Maybe you were making a substantive argument. Maybe it would be better to make a political argument, and why politically moving on a particular issue would be good for the other country, also good for the United States. So you find different ways of coming back to the table, always being inventive, being agile, and never closing the door. You don't ever want to close the door unless what you intend is for an absolute breach. And those situations typically involve other concerned agencies or the president. Absent something like that, where an agency comes in and says, because of these 4 reasons, please don't go further, please cut this off. Or if the president says, I don't like the way this is going, just stop. Other than that, you always find a way to go back.
That's good advice. You know, you alluded earlier to the importance of building relations with your counterpart from different countries. How important is that relationship? How do you build trust with your counterpart? And are there times where your counterpart is just someone you cannot work with? And how do you deal with those situations? Do you really have a choice?
You know, building trust is one of those elusive kinds of things. You're sitting across from someone, you come to know them, you come to see the way they think. You usually learn something about them, quite apart from their bio or something like that. You learn a little bit perhaps about their family, perhaps about some current concern. One negotiator, and of course you know him well as well, Wendy, his wife was very, very ill during the negotiation. Remarkably, he stuck with the negotiation, though she was in hospital. But you learn that, and you instinctively, first of all, are somewhat incredulous, but also admiring that the negotiator would stay with his job rather than go back or rather than substitute someone else. But you also develop a kind of rapport that is a little less tangible. It's hard to describe, but there's that empathy, that sympathy, appreciation on the part of the other side, at your own sensitivity to the situation, that just helps to fill out the nature of the relationship beyond just you want X and I want Y. Mm-hmm. So usually you can find some personal common ground. And you strive for that because these pieces build a kind of rapport. Would you call it trust? Maybe, but not necessarily. But they build a rapport. You can work with this person. You both understand each other. And because of that understanding, you both would want to try and accommodate each other if you can, if the political and other constraints don't prohibit that.
Yeah. And you're more comfortable exploring things with them if you can trust them. But I take the point. Trust is with apostrophes.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. Now, I remember very well during the China WTO negotiations, in a very difficult conversation with a very high level Chinese official, and we had been working with each other for a long time. So at the critical moment, when he said to me, I can't do it. I just can't do that. I knew it was true. I just knew it was true. It wasn't a feint. It wasn't to gain advantage. It wasn't to gain sympathy. It wasn't to buy time. It was simply true. He couldn't couldn't be responsive to the issue at hand. That came because of all these intangible elements built over a long period of time. So trust, maybe, but more importantly, I knew when I was being told the truth, and I understood that. Mm-hmm. And so these elements are absolutely critical. There have been situations where a negotiator is particularly difficult or noxious. They don't happen very often because if you're in this game, you have some diplomatic skill, right? And you have a political sense and a political skill. And what goes around comes around. And you never really want to leave people with a sour taste in their mouth. So it doesn't happen very often. But once in a while, I can think of one in particular involving a particular country where this was just bad chemistry on every level, sort of hostility on the other side. So try as you might, that hostility was evident in every move, every comment, every step. So much so that his side of the table were embarrassed. And in that case, I went to the foreign minister. This was when I was deputy. I went to the foreign minister and said I thought it would be advisable to have someone else take the lead. And that, in fact, happened. But that's the only situation I can think of where truly there was no way to smooth the relationship and no way to make the negotiation remotely productive.
Mm-hmm. You know, one thing I recall about working with you, Ambassador Barshefsky, was that you were so well prepared. And I'll always remember sitting in your office late hours, you know, a yellow legal pad, and we'd go through every argument or every proposal. Like, we didn't leave a stone unturned. How important is preparation to a negotiation? And is it more important for women to be well prepared more than men at the negotiating table?
So I think preparation is everything. And you're right. I mean, I didn't even want to think about the hours we spent. So role playing, I'll say this, they'll say that. I'll have to say this, but they'll have to say that. So I'll move in this direction, but they'll move in that direction. And it's going up and back and trying to figure out every combination and permutation before you've ever sat down with the other side. You spend much more time with your own side and your own administration than you ever do with the other side. So preparation is really critical. Why? Because it keeps you limber. It keeps you agile. If the negotiation begins to get momentum and you're well prepared, you can drive that momentum and propel the negotiation forward. There's no hesitancy. There's no, oh, gee, I have to think about that. Can I call you tomorrow? In which case, whatever momentum you built up is gone. You're constantly innovating, constantly changing things up, constantly trying to move the ball forward. And that happens because of preparation. I always like to think, and I know you did, Wendy, when you negotiated, that you knew more about the issue and about the ways of getting what you wanted than anybody on the other side did. And I think by and large, that tended to be the decisive factor in a negotiation. So that's one part. The other part, I have, of course, a legal background. I was a lawyer for many years. And as a lawyer, of course, preparation's everything, right? You'd never go into court. You'd never address the other side. You'd never sit down with a client or sit down with the board of directors and not be thoroughly and completely prepared. You also learn, in addition to preparation, when to talk, when to say nothing, when to let the odd comment slip by, just no problem, but when to press your case forward and when to try and advantage the arguments that you are making. As a woman, I never felt disadvantaged in any negotiation. That seems almost incredible to say, but there are really two reasons for that. Number one, there were many times in the course of a negotiation where I felt if I were a man, the other side would have committed homicide on me. I mean, where the other side just wanted to strangle you, right? You've been in that situation umpteen times, but you're a woman, and so decorum is maintained. That's point one. Point two, women are more intuitive than men as a general rule. Obviously not always true, but as a general rule, women are more intuitive than men. And for me, and I think for you as well, that intuition is so valuable. I'll give you an example. As a woman, you know if your friend is upset. They don't have to say a word to you. They don't have to open their mouth. You just look at them. You see it in their eyes, or you see it in their posture, or you see it sort of the furrow of the brow, or something is, you just know. Men tend not to pick up on that. They're less adept at picking up body language, at picking up nonverbal cues. But this is where women tend to excel for whatever series of reasons. And that is, in a negotiation, so valuable because the body talks before the mouth ever opens. you can see it on the other side. You know when you're making an argument and it's just not making any impression whatsoever. They don't have to say anything. You just realize you're on the wrong track. The way you're articulating your argument or the issue itself, something is not right there. You can see when the other side is getting upset or upset with you. They don't have to say a word. They want to. They don't have to say a word. You see it. And you can lower the temperature without ever acknowledging that they seem to be upset or put out. So that intuition is extremely valuable. So as a woman, I actually always felt advantaged in a negotiation setting. I don't think I ever felt disadvantaged.
Interesting. So back to this intuition, is part of it being able to, what I'd say, read the room, not just your counterpart, but sometimes you look at the people sitting next to your counterpart as well. Can you share why that could be important?
Well, there's a lot that transpires between the lead in the negotiation and his or her lieutenants. And
the backbenchers too.
And the backbenchers. You know, many a time, Wendy, I know this happened to you, you'd hear a groan from the backbench, not because of what the other side said, but because of what you said. And then you think, oh, I've really made a mess of this. And so taking a look at the team in total, usually there's a skeptic, usually there's a naysayer, usually there's a tough line, hard line, dissatisfied, doesn't like any of this. There's usually a conciliator. There is often just someone who's friendly, just says a couple things, seems to lower the temperature in the room. And this is just really a function of the different personalities that sort of pertain in any negotiation. So being able to understand who these people are, how effective they are, and whether they have power in the context of the negotiation is critical. Because it might be that you would say to me in a negotiation, can you talk to that minister over there? He's really not happy. Or I would say to you, who is that third guy? There's just a sour expression on his face. This is bad, because he seems always to have the ear of the negotiator. And so you just need to try and figure out all the pieces they're dealing with, including the personalities on their side that they're dealing with, so that you can try and tamp down the problem areas, or at least understand them, and then perhaps reframe or refashion what your arguments are, so as not to evoke in that person as negative a reaction.
Maybe we can turn a minute to your experience on the multilateral front. I mean, you conducted a lot of negotiations in the WTO and APEC. How are those negotiations different from a bilateral negotiation? And can they be more fun or more entertaining?
Well, they certainly can be entertaining. Multilateral negotiations, those are like three-dimensional chess twice over, right? Any negotiation is like three-dimensional chess. There's a lot to think about and a lot to consider, and a lot of moves or arguments you want to make that may not even appeal to the negotiator, but in the reporting on that side to their own cabinet, it will matter to somebody else in that cabinet who matters. So there's all of that sort of goes on. And in a multilateral setting, this is compounded hugely, because it isn't just that you're dealing with the concerns of a country across the table from you. I'll make it a simple example. That country is also negotiating with other countries with whom you're also negotiating. That country has to also respond to other countries, not only to you on the particular issue involved. What is that country going to be saying to the others? What do the others say to that country? How does that impact what that country's flexibility is with respect to my request? How might it change my request to that country? Indeed, how might it obviate a request to that country? when you then realize on a particular narrow issue, some other country is calling the shots. This becomes very complicated, and the number of moving pieces is really astonishing. It's interesting because earlier this interesting, and it's fine fiction out. And sure, matter more than, meaning some countries' views take with them other countries. Other countries rely on them to represent their interests. Other countries are just happy to go along. Whatever the outcome is, they'll go along. So you don't have to worry about those sets of countries. Try and focus, you take a multilateral view, but try and focus your attention on the countries that are the opinion leaders in the region, opinion leaders globally, or opinion leaders on that particular issue because the country has an expertise in that issue. And so you take a multilateral forum and you try and narrow down that range of actors to deal with initially. If you can't make progress with them, you're not making progress. But if you can, then you have a chance of expanding that nature of understanding, bringing on the other countries that you need to bring on.
So coalition building is important.
It's vital.
Yeah.
Vital. Yeah.
So we're going to wrap up now. I just wanted, and we can go on for a long time hearing your experiences, and it's just been, it's brought back a lot of memories. But for this audience, and these are kind of emerging women from Asia pursuing a career in trade, what advice would you give them, not only just on trade negotiations, but more generally career advice? What worked for you? What didn't work for you? And I ask you, as someone, you've been my mentor throughout my career, and you've offered me great advice. And if I'll probably add a little after you tell me what you think the advice, useful advice, would be, because you've given me some great advice throughout my career.
Well, you're kind to say that, but it's run in both directions. I think, first of all, there's no reason that you shouldn't have confidence in yourself, period. If this is an area you want to pursue, there's no reason to believe you couldn't pursue it or shouldn't pursue it or wouldn't be good at it. And there's no reason to believe that you should or would be held back. Don't make assumptions that reduce your own stature, or that reduce your own intellect, or reduce your own ambition, reduce your own capabilities. You should be making quite the opposite assumptions. Those assumptions have to be backed up with talent. And to me, talent comes from a lot of hard work. So being prepared, taking what you do seriously, doing the best that you can, these are fundamental, I think, to progressing in any career and to staking out a unique position for yourself. I think also, don't look to be insulted. There are lots of comments that are made by men about women, by women about men sometimes, and you could decide you were insulted by the comment, and that changes your worldview entirely. Just plow ahead. You stay on your own course. If someone is offensive, call it out. If someone is harassing you, so on and so forth, obviously that needs to be reported. And that did happen to me during one negotiation, which I'll never forget. And I reported the person. And it wasn't as against me. It was against,
I recall, yeah.
It was against my number two. I went to that person and said that if he ever did that again to anybody on my staff, I would break his knees. And then I reported him to his minister, and he never showed up again. So yes, call that out, but don't you be derailed by it. You stay on your course. Stay on your course. And I think that's also an important piece of advice going forward.
So in other words, don't personalize a lot of these comments that are made, particularly in a negotiation. People are trying to play with you and play with your mind and kind of bring out some insecurities.
It's exactly right, and that's much better said than the way I put it. But it is part of it, and part of it is just the obnoxiousness of the other person to make comments like that. So
Yeah.
they're obnoxious. You let them know you think they're obnoxious. You move on.
Right.
Don't
stay
get
focused.
derailed.
Yeah.
Stay focused. Stay focused. Right. There's a long game there, and that's where you're headed. Not today's event.
Yeah. And I would just conclude kind of picking up on your other piece of advice, because you always pushed me to, and I call it almost getting out of your comfort zone. Okay. Like, you seize that opportunity. There's another job opening. You're thinking of this, but maybe I should stay where I am because I'm good at it. At some point, if you're going to advance in your career, you need to take those risks and seize the opportunities. And sometimes you realize you can do that next job just as well or even better because you're bringing skills that you've acquired through the years.
Exactly. I think you're making just a terrific point. The skills you amass, the knowledge that you amass never goes to waste. Everything is used. It is astonishing to me when I think about it, how some expertise, some bit of knowledge that was just random, but sort of stuck with you, is really useful 20 years later or 10 years later. And so none of this is wasted. If you're on a course and you get sidetracked, or you realize you've picked a career that doesn't really suit, no problem. Everything you've done to that point will be useful in the future. It will be useful in the future. Just reset yourself, get back on a path that is more comfortable for you or more productive for you. But all of this knowledge, all of these life experiences really do bring to bear in the sort of the fullness of a career, whatever career that might be. And so I always say, no bit of knowledge is ever wasted. There is nothing you learn that was a waste. Didn't need to learn it. What a stupid thing that I had to memorize X or Y or Z, right? It just isn't. It's there. It's usable oftentimes. And if nothing else, you're just a more confident person to feel that you're broader as a person than the more narrow image you might be presenting.
Well, that's great advice. And on that note, thank you, Ambassador Barshefsky. We really enjoyed having you with us and sharing with us your experiences, your expertise, and your encouragement. Thank you.
Thank you.